Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 124. And in this episode, I'm just going to share a little personal testimony how I got to this political ideology, which focuses on freedom. When I was, and basically I came up with this idea because I got into a little bit of an online back and forth, and it doesn't last that long because I really don't, I respond to this guy in meme because he just is not that, he's too deep into his own ideology. So I don't even think he reads anything that I write back to him. So I just reply to him in pictures, even though he went to an Ivy League school. And back in high school, I thought that he was one of the smart kids. And, you know, I was one of the I was in a lot of the smart classes, but I never really studied. So everyone was a genius in my mind. I had more other issues to think about, just that I was struggling with. Most of it was racially related. My parents were very much pro-Korean identity, in spite of the fact that we were living in the United States. I was born in the United States. They stressed that I learn Korean, that I understand, Korean ways, etc. So much that I lived in Korea for 3 years, came back, and that was more my decision, partly to get away from my parents, but also to try to figure out what was really going on, why I needed a better explanation for all of the racial, struggles that I was going through, and tried to figure out a good answer that I couldn't easily poke holes through. And everything I heard up until that point, and this was in the 90s, 80s and 90s, everything that I heard, you name it, I could poke holes through it, right? So it would be easy just to simply buy into whatever trendy expression people were throwing around, but it was too easy for me to poke holes in it, right? To basically show how it's not perfect, it's problematic, at least for some people. And so, I spent 3 years in Korea. I came back and I began to see things in a different way. I didn't have a lot of thoughts, and going into race theory as a grad student was far from my mind, but there it was. And so I came back from Korea. I entered into a doctoral program, and people told me that if you want to get a PhD, you have to get professors to agree to work with you, to be your advisors, to be on your committee. And so what I started to do was the easiest thing to do, which was try to figure out a topic that I was, at least a little interested in, but that would get professors on board with it as well. And so I tried to craft an idea around professors that I liked. And unfortunately, the professor that, um, you know, I related to most was someone that no one else wanted to work with, right? Because he was arrogant, perhaps. He was difficult to work with. And so no one wanted to be on the same committee as him. And so I was kind of stuck. And 4 years into my program, I had finished my coursework and I was trying to get other professors to work with me. But I didn't really mind so much because I was being, very active in the church, doing a lot of churchy type things. And so it allowed me to sort of try to figure out what to do next. And it turns out this professor who I attached my cart to was going to leave the school. And so I had to either transfer with him to the other school or have a different topic. And if you're familiar with doctoral programs, to do a change in topic after 4 years is not so easy. But over the course of the 4 years, I started, exploring race dynamics. And so as he was leaving, he said, um, the topic you were thinking of doing is very much unrelated to your personal life. And so why not get into the whole race dynamics thing? And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And so I pulled up all my stakes and started all over after 4 years. And again, as I said, since I was active in the church, it made more sense. And the journey of going through the 4 years wasn't wasted because I did a lot of philosophy, and it helped me sort of come up with a intellectual approach to survive in grad school, a grad school which was very much atheistic, very anti-Christian God. So it was a good practice to try to maintain my sanity, but also still be successful in a hostile kind of environment. And so then I got into race dynamics, which, as it turned out, to be the best thing ever. So I got into, so I was taking race theory classes, and started doing all the required work to write a dissertation in race theory. And I passed my preliminary exams, and I got into the ABD phase where you're supposed to write. But the problem was I still didn't have a race theory that I was going to use to sort of orient myself and guide my study and help me make a conclusion. So my new advisor, and by this time I was on my fourth dissertation advisor, long story, won't go into it here. She suggested that I read Howard Wynant and Michael Omey's Racial Formation. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, this is it. Okay, yeah, I can use this theory because it acknowledged that pretty much everyone has their own way of understanding race, right? And so you go to the library and you try to see and read what other scholars were saying and how they were trying to explain race. You literally have thousands of different ways of studying race. And so how was I supposed to make a choice? And Howard Wynant, so Wynant and Omey, they basically allowed me to not have to make a choice. That sort of this race making or racialization, or in their words, racial formation, was a process. And it did not necessarily have to be one. They don't really say this in their own words. They use this racial formation thing, but their subsequent book, Wynant's books after that one book, he sort of departs from this original theory that he proposed in racial formation. And I think he went into a weird direction, but that's not unusual for scholars who are into postmodernism, right? They find and settle in on a subjective perspective which fits their own personal morality, and then that's where they live. But of course, I used racial formation and I pushed it all the way to the extreme. And I, use it as a guideline for my conclusion for the dissertation. And the conclusion I was supposed to make was that Asians are supposed to get politically active and fight for a piece of the pie, just like everyone else had done before them. But the problem was that, again, because I was active in the church, hypocrisy, which is what that was, cannot be, is unacceptable, right? I can't make a hypocritical conclusion, a hypocritical suggestion, a hypocritical prescription. It's against everything that I believe morally, right? So hypocrisy, at the same time I'm doing all this academic studying, I'm working in the church, I'm working in the field, as they would say, the practical aspect. So, most scholarship is very theoretical, but I had this advantage of being in the field, working with people, struggling with the issues that I was studying. And so, yes, I experimented on my church, right, or with the youth group that I was put in charge. I would try out certain theories and see if it helped people or if it didn't. And if it didn't help people, then I knew that it was trash. And so I would trash it and I would move on to the next theory. And so hypocrisy was something that was thrown in my face very early. I think I was 22 years old. A 13-year-old kid that I was teaching threw that word at me, and he was right. And it's hypocrisy is something that Jesus condemned, but you don't have to be a Christian to hate hypocrisy. Everyone hates it, right? And I realized that hypocrisy, when it is in government, when it is committed by people who are in power, you have injustice, right? So hypocrisy is the root of all injustice, which is what I say very frequently. And so it can't be what I supposedly, I always say I'm fighting for justice, then it can't be part of what I conclude, what I write. It can't be anything in my life. And so hypocrisy became sort of the guiding principle, to understand not only everything that I read in school, but also in the way that I interpreted scripture. Anything that I conclude as an interpretation from scripture cannot be hypocritical, right? So just because you said it and you're a Christian doesn't make it right, right? Is it hypocritical or not? And if it's hypocritical, then it cannot be what scripture is telling us to do, right? And so that requirement of not being hypocritical, not only did I impose it on what I was studying in school, but I imposed it also in my ministry, in my own personal life as well, right? Everyone hates it. And so as soon as someone figures out you're a hypocrite, either people will say, well, everyone's a hypocrite, or they will try to destroy you for it, right? Because that's just the way it is. So I couldn't have it. And so that put me in this quandary, right? So my conclusion of my dissertation was something, middle of the road-ish, very pre-libertarian, right? But it was just sort of like, how can we have all of this? And yet, if I were to say that everyone who wrote stuff about race before me had something right, then, because I couldn't say they were wrong, well, then what could it be? Because all of it is hypocritical, but they can't be totally wrong. So what would be a solution? So for about 2 years, I was in a quandary. And then it so happened that, I was working for 2 departments in the university. They call it a co-hire, right? So I was in 2 different departments at the same time. And the one department decided that it was going to have a new curriculum. It was one of those general studies programs. And so they decided to change the texts that were required in the program. And I was like, okay, here we go. And so this one section, all of the books were like, I don't know, 500 pages. And this was back in 2005. So the emphasis was on reading. So you were going to try to make your students read as much as possible. Well, trying to make them write as much as possible failed utterly. So I don't know, so in my head, I was like, okay, well, we're going to try to get them to read. So I'm going to try to find the shortest book in every section, right? So there were 7 different sections. We were supposed to pick out 7 books. And so just one particular section, I looked at all the books and they were all like 500 pages long. 400 or 500 pages. And so I was like, well, this is not going to go well. But I looked at the one book and it had freedom, right? The word free in the title. And I was like, well, can't be that bad. It turned out it was Free to Choose by Milton and Rose Friedman. And I read it, and the first chapter is where he has the story of the pencil. And I was absolutely blown away, blown away. Because that was what I was looking for, right? Because there was one line where he says that people who otherwise would have hated each other if they met cooperated to make money. And it was like this big light bulb that went off in my head. People are trying to ban hate. They're trying to criminalize hate. But obviously you can't I should make that an episode. In fact, I'll make that an episode later. But anyway, so people are trying to criminalize hate, but you can't. That's one of those human emotions that you just can't get rid of, right? And so why fight it? Why not embrace it? Why not make it part of life, but make people realize that there's something better than hate, and that is getting rich through cooperation, right? And so prosperity, peace, cooperation, all of those things that everyone says that they want, but without all of the violence, without all of the conflict. This is perfect. And so, it was in the middle of the semester. I totally changed my syllabus for the race class that I was teaching, right? So the beginning of the class, I taught in the traditional way. And so all the students were like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I said, no, I got to change the syllabus. Sorry to do this to you, but here's the new syllabus. And people were like, what are you doing? Some people got upset, but a lot of other people were like, finally, something different. And from then on, I only taught race from a free market perspective. And of course, it took me a while to get up to speed to where everyone else was, probably where you are right now. And then one day, a startup publisher, you know, asked me if there was because I kept teaching the same classes every year, and so they were like, "Wow, do you?" Most professors put together a collection of articles or chapters that they want to assign to their students, right? And it's basically a reader, right? They call it a reader, where you pick and choose from all these different books. Well, they offered me the chance to put together a reader, and I said, "Well, can I put all this other stuff in there?" Like, yeah, sure, do that. And so it turned into this Frankenstein book where it's not really a reader at all, but it has a lot of my own stuff in there. And that's where I poured in all my, free market centered understanding of race theory. I consumed everything, Milton Friedman, anything that I could find on YouTube. And that took me to Ron Paul. I saw a John Stossel video, and he was interviewing this politician. His name was Ron Paul. And I was like, what? I never heard of this guy. And then I listened to him and I was like, oh my goodness, there's a politician who, is not like all of the others. This is crazy. And so that's when I heard the word libertarian for the first time in my life. And I came home and I told my wife, I said, hey, I think we're libertarian. And she said, what's that? And I said, I don't know yet, but I'm going to do more research. But I think that's what we are, politically speaking. And then, so I was going on and on. My preaching changed as well, for the better, of course. And if you listen to any of my sermon episodes, then you know that there's a very, very strong free market, libertarian, uh, lean toward in it, in everything that I say now. And so one of my church members, one of his coworkers told him about the Mises Institute. And so I was like, oh, okay, check that out. And now here I am, full blown ANCAP in my public life. So consistency and demand to excise hypocrisy in my life, right? That was going to be my principle, led me to anarcho-capitalism. And everything in my life is better for it. My understanding of scripture is so much better, right? Because you can't contradict yourself in your interpretation, but everyone still has different interpretations. Well, you let everyone live with their subjectivity, and over time, as I mentioned earlier, you discover what the morality is. Like, as you play it out, as you try to put it into action, as you live that understanding in your life, does it work? Does it not work? And if it doesn't work, then it was just, an ideal. It was just a subjective view, but doesn't work for everybody else. And so you discover morality, you discover the best interpretation of scripture in that way. So this was great personally. It was great for my my married life. It was great for my family. But when it came to ministry and the church, most people are not ready for this. A lot of the guys that I taught when they were in high school and junior high and elementary school, some of them stuck around. And so they're basically the only people left in my church. But when it comes to interacting with former seminary students that I went to school with, not a lot of them want to talk to me too much because I was always crazy. I was always different, even when I was in seminary. And now I'm even so radically different that they all feel uncomfortable around me, right? It's almost like I'm satanic, which I'm not, right? It's total opposite. And of course, after doing teaching in the university for full time for 17 consecutive years, It wasn't my politics, although people have tried to get rid of me because of my politics, because I was pro-freedom, anti-socialism, anti-communism, anti-fascism in the correct way, right? I was fired because of my faith, right? Because of the fact that I would openly declare that it was a Jesus freak. At least that's what I think. It can't be proven, and no one will ever admit to it. But in my arbitration, it's just going to be focused on breach of contract, right? So that's going to be the case that's going to be argued on my behalf. And so the reasoning, the rationale, the motivation for not renewing my contract will not be discussed, right? No one really cares. So basically, this unrelenting pursuit to figure out what's hypocritical and therefore invalidate it got me, quote unquote, fired, right? So my contract was not renewed. I could never get, I submitted paper proposals for conferences and whatnot and never got accepted. So I just basically gave up. And so, which is why I turned to podcasting, right? Someone out there might want to hear a very, very consistent, anti-hypocritical, pro-Jesus kind of, message, podcast, whatever. And here it is. This is what I do in my spare time. So hopefully that journey that I took and that I sort of compacted in 20 minutes was a little bit entertaining, a little informative, and sort of gives you a clue that if someone really is dedicated to learning, not without bias, right? So come what may, stick your head in all the stuff that you think is wrong, but you learn what they're saying, you master it, and then you realize what its flaws are, and then you move on. Like if someone is really truly dedicated to that, then I believe there are people like that. And so eventually, the good ideas come to the top, right? Because bad ideas require force, but good ideas do not. And in the end, the truth will out. I will talk to you in the next episode next week. Otherwise, you will hear a sermon episode from me on Sunday. Have a great weekend.